on the TNN Motorsports Hardcore Heat episode, we discussed how the prevailing opinion on 9/9/99 launch day, in basically every critical write-up, was to skip that game, because not only was it bad, but that a vastly superior off-road game was coming down the pipe. Just shy of 3 months later, that game finally hit, Sega Rally Championship 2. The first Sega Rally was an arcade game that pushed visual boundaries, so when it got ported over to the underpowered Sega Saturn, they had to rebuild it from scratch, redrawing the distances and controls based on the feelings of the Saturn graphical and controller capabilities. They did an incredibly attentive and effective job, and Sega Rally Championship is considered one of the few truly unequivocally great Saturn games. The graphics are sharp, and the control is incredible, reminiscent of the way the very best Dreamcast racing release so far, Hydro Thunder, controls. As I said on its episode, it's so responsive, it's like it's tapped into my intentions as communicated by my brain. I'd never played the Saturn version before, so I was astonished at how immediately fun and involving it was. The conversation about Sega Rally Championship 2 is a more complicated one. The arcade original, simply called Sega Rally 2, was an incredible, unmitigated achievement, pushing Sega's Model 3 hardware board to its absolute limits for its breathtaking visuals. The early months of the Dreamcast had given the system a reputation as being the perfect console to bring over optimal arcade ports, like Soul Calibur or the aforementioned Hydro Thunder. Soul Calibur's port actually improved on the graphical fidelity of the original arcade game, which made excitement high for the visuals of a game like Sega Rally, which already looked so impressive. Sega Rally 2 was one of the first games announced for the system, and suggested that this would be a true display of the hardware's capabilities. But first, we need to talk about Windows CE. As a company, Sega routinely displayed all the hallmarks of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. As a severe sufferer myself, I can see the signs with ease. They were never bereft of really cool and boundary-pushing ideas, but they were perpetually shooting themselves in the foot and abandoning things left and right, for no real reason and to no benefit. You can see this in the chaotic way that the teams responsible for Sonic games were organized, or adding a modem to the Dreamcast and making it woefully complicated to navigate, or creating the Saturn console and then just going, and starting to build an entirely different console instead. They were extremely adept at conjuring up innovation up to the point where they'd actually have to do it. And then something shiny would come along, and they'd go do something else instead. In 1996, Microsoft released an operating system called Windows CE, which nominally stood for Compact/Embedded, and was designed to be licensed out to other creators as a sort of base of operations, for them to build their own works upon. In the years leading up to the Dreamcast's launch, Sega worked closely with Microsoft to run an optimized version of Windows CE as the bedrock of the Dreamcast's framework. For reasons that I can't seem to publicly discern, Sega just did something else instead. SegaRetro.org, an invaluable resource, simply says, quote, Sega chose to go a different route than what was originally planned. And that's the end of the analysis. Instead, Sega decided to bundle basic operating systems within the discs themselves, but decided to still allow companies to use Windows CE anyway, so a few handfuls of Dreamcast games just run on this CE operating system. We've covered a couple so far, including Armada, which makes sense since it has the soul of a PC game, and NFL Quarterback Club 2000, which also makes sense because it is a slapdash nightmare. But for the most part, it was not an option game developers took, because of their apparent unfamiliarity with navigating it, and the half-assed way it was implemented with Sega. Sega Rally Championship 2 was developed on the Windows CE operating system. which was designed for smaller, more limited hardware. This was more powerful than the specs for the original Sega Rally, but this was not going to be something that was competing with the Model 3 arcade board. The port was delayed several times and had a demo at the 1998 Tokyo Game Show, where the response was that it looked unfinished. It was delayed until January 1999 in Japan, which meant it got delayed in the US until after Thanksgiving. It displays a drastically reduced visual sharpness from the eye-popping arcade original, with the cars looking a little softer and the lighting effects a little duller, sometimes not even keeping pace with the aforementioned and much maligned hardcore heat. But graphics aren't everything, and in fact are more of a bonus benefit than any sort of main course. As I discussed in the Hardcore Heat video, that game looked nice and had a lot of imagination as far as courses and structure, but that game handled like absolute trash and was completely miserable to play. Sega Rally Championship 2 still looks generally good and also handles great. They've diversified the steering from Sega Rally 1, which was lightning responsive in a way that almost made it too easy. Sega Rally 2 has a much higher learning curve, but in a way that rewards gradual learning. Turns I absolutely could not make on my first try started becoming second nature by my 10th. The game is also very generous with cars and tracks. There is a code you can put in to unlock all of them, but there's a whole section of different options right off the jump. One way I saw it presented that feels appropriate here is that Sega Rally 2 doesn't really aim to 100% emulate the actual experience of driving a rally car, but instead does a good job at recreating what you'd imagine the experience of driving a rally car would be. A charmingly two-tiered approximation that makes it immersive and fun. A change of pace from the exacting ruthlessness of something like Monaco Grand Prix. Ultimately, despite all of the Sturm und Drang of the transition from arcade to Dreamcast, and the controversies of the Windows CE situation, Sega Rally Championship 2 doesn't really wear any of that baggage on its screen. It is, at its heart, a simple arcade racing game, with nice visuals, a lot of options, and good, responsive, in-depth handling. It's not the most complicated or meticulous game, but it doesn't have to be. It is simply just a lot of fun. And I played it casually on the regular, because it's just a good, straightforward time. You can know all the drama involved because having the word Sega in your title means there's gonna be some wacky drama. But unlike something like Sonic Adventure, which is befuddling to experience until you know all the convoluted backstory, Sega Rally Championship 2 simply is what it is. A fun, pick-up-and-play racing game that doesn't need much explanation. Just sit down and get ready to race. Next time, the early bird catches a mortar to the face.